Morning, everyone. My name is Sanjeev Lingaya, and I'm co-creator of Home Choose 2, and I'll be guiding us through this session on reporting racism in mainstream civil society, which is episode 5 of the Race Equity series from Home Choose 2. Hosted by ACEVO and Voice for Change England. This is the final for now episode of the Race Equity series, but we're not going away, more of which towards the end, we'll say what we're up to. For those of you coming in, please do say hello in the chat. So just some practical things, just in terms of kind of etiquette and so on. So today's session is being recorded. And a recording of the first bit, more the presentation bit, not the Q&A, will be shared kind of widely. So you'll be getting a consent message popping up. So please do click on that. If you don't want your face to be seen, we can perfectly understand. So you can just switch your camera off, and the recording will be available on the ACEVO.org.uk website, and links will be posted in the chat. Just to say, we use otter.ai for captions, so please click the banner for otter.ai if you would like to use them. We ask that you keep microphones muted while you're not speaking. So as we mentioned, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you can write questions for the Q&A as we go along in the chat, or when that part of the session arises, you can raise your virtual or physical hand, and we'll do our best to spot you. So I think that as most things, just to kind of flag that towards the end we have a 60-second survey, and we do ask that you don't disappear off and just kind of spend 60 seconds to fill that in, because just as we want to support and challenge civil society on anti-racism and race equity, we need your feedback to do that work more effectively. So without further ado, I'll kick off in the content, unless I don't think I've missed anything significant. So this session is on reporting racism and how mainstream civil societies organizations handle concerns and complaints when issues arise. This is the acid test of our work at Home Choose 2, where we try to challenge and support civil society to take serious action for anti-racism and race equity. So we've got a wonderful guest speaker today, and I'm going to hand over to my excellent colleague, Christabel Quainer from Voice for Change England, and she'll take you through the next part of the discussion. Thanks, Christabel.
Thanks, Sanjeev, for the lovely introduction. My name is Christabel Quainer, and I'm a Policy Officer for Voice for Change England. And I'm joined today by the lovely Margaret Greer. She is a fantastic speaker, and I look forward to her sharing her wisdom with the audience. And I've led on this session on reporting racism, and I've undertaken some research and writing with the Home Truths. Okay, so I'd like to just share Margaret's experiences. She is a National Race Equality Officer for the Unison, the trade union. Her exceptional work has earned her the Nelson Mandela Award, acknowledging her outstanding contributions in combating racism. Margaret is a councillor and a deputy mayor of Enfield, where she collaborates with local leaders to address community needs. She's also the trustee of Boiler House Spaces, a community charity in North Hackney, and is actively involved with the Methodist Church and other community organisations. As one of the founding directors of Caribbean Voices for Labour, a non-profit organisation. And in October 2024, she was presented with the ARA Achievement Recognition Awards as the exemplary political and community leader of the year. This further demonstrates her commitment to community engagement and represents the interests of diverse communities. She's a passionate supporter of Manchester United, and her dedication to equality, diversity, and inclusion makes her an invaluable asset to every community she serves. So lots of impressive accolades there. And before we hear more from Margaret, I just want to share today's topic, and speak you through why it's really important why we discuss reporting racism when it comes to addressing institutional racism. So Shireen, can I have the slides, please? Thank you. So in general, we've all heard the importance of speaking up, whether that's in our personal lives or professional lives. And we know it's not always easy, but uncomfortable conversations are a part of life. And it's through these discussions how we create change. And in this circumstance, structural change. And listening to voices, particularly those who face discrimination, is the core of civil society, because we expect those in power, a position of power, to listen to the experience of people. But what happens when those voices raise concerns about racism in the organization? So before we kick off, I just want to say a really profound quote from one of our Home Truths 2 reports. And this quote says, when it comes to a conversation on racism, somehow you end up talking about something else. So we found that most Black and minoritized ethnic participants in our research have faced, seen, or heard racial discrimination in civil society, and many were unhappy with how these cases were handled. And that's something else that the interview was referring to. That can also refer to the denial, the deflection, and suppression of reports of racism. It seems that there's a pattern of institutions that they struggle to confront these home truths, and acknowledging racism may challenge their self-image as ethical or even progressive, and this forces leaders to confront a reality that they may have contributed to perpetuating institutional discrimination. But whether that is to protect their reputation or to avoid internal discomfort, this is simply not sustainable, because this deflection is only harming the trust and well-being of Black and minoritized ethnic people in civil society. However, civil society can break this cycle of denial. But first, I want to talk you through how it can be identified. Next slide, please. Thank you. So DARVO stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender. It's a term coined by American psychologist and researcher Jennifer Freyd, and it's an effective tactic that's often used to deflect responsibility for harmful behavior. So in the context of reporting racism, organizations reacting to reports may use this tactic to push back on the existence of a problem, attacking the credibility or intentions of those that raise racism in the workplace. So here on this slide, you can see the denial of racism has taken place. The victim reporter gets attacked, and before you know it, the person who's reported it is now perceived to be the problem. So just to echo that quote I said earlier, you end up talking about that something else. And our power structures are rooted with these deflective responses of incidents over racism. And this could look like in a variety of ways, such as denying in terms of what another person is saying, how institutional racism shows up in a space, or claiming the right to define what counts as racism and what doesn't. And in some other cases, it can be even more subtle, such as undermining or dismissing concerns and focusing only on explicit and individual acts rather than structural patterns. All those barriers to people being heard, deciding whose voices matters, whose voices carries weight, and who gets promoted or supported. So therefore, the denial of structural racism is a significant barrier to achieving racial equity, because when organizations refuse to acknowledge these systemic inequalities, they enable victim-blaming narratives from reports, and it allows the organization to attribute inequality to personal failings rather than these structural patterns that we often witness. And this shifts attention away from structural factors and places the burden on the individual by the denial, the deflection, the silencing, and so on. But to break this cycle, we need to recognize when DARVO takes place and to dismantle these deeply rooted habits and replace those with meaningful action, because to be anti-racist also means to be anti-DARVO. Can I have the third slide, please? Thank you. So to create anti-racist culture built on trust, organizations must perceive reports as opportunities for growth. As I touched on earlier, is these uncomfortable conversations that lead to change. And therefore, this can be done through humane reporting systems that center and value the voices of those reporting racism. And this means embedding this with care and commitment and honest dialogue with the final goal of that long-term meaningful change. So in terms of humane reporting systems, this can look like a number of things. For example, studies show that 63% of people are more likely to report bullying or harassment if there's an anonymous reporting platform in place. And organizations could also implement clear accountability measures that take a very firm stance against racism, which is always followed by concrete action, rather than I don't know, those vague policies that happen to be tucked away in a staff intranet. They're not really explicit, they're not really concrete, and it's not always promised with action. And unacceptable behaviors like DARVO must be explicitly defined with examples and addressed head on. And it's okay to feel uncertain sometimes about how to handle reports, but this is never an excuse to deflect or ignore. And there's always external expertise that organizations can reach out to, such as DEI specialists or trade union advisors, to establish just clear targets and help organizations grow in that ownership. Facing the mirror and breaking the cycle of deflection is critical for long-term systemic change, and reports should be seen as absolutely valuable when it comes to becoming anti-racist. And allowing an act of racism sends a very powerful message, if it goes unchecked, that it can and it will happen again. Thank you for the slides, Shireen, and for your lovely visuals, Pamela. And speaking of external expertise, I want to give the floor to the fantastic Margaret Greer, who I'm really excited about. And yeah, I'll allow her to introduce herself to you all.
Okay, so thank you, Christabella, and thank you so much for inviting me this morning. As you've heard, my name's Margaret Greer, and I am Unison's National Race Equality Officer, and it gives me an absolute pleasure just to be here with you talking about, obviously, very difficult situations, but one which I think is very powerful and meaningful to have. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, well said, Margaret. Thank you. All right, let's kick off. I want to start by reflecting on the current state of reporting and responding to racism. How would you describe where things stand, and do you think we're seeing any shifts?
Okay. Well, I think it was really important in terms of how you set the landscape there just now. But I do think that reporting racism is changing, it's evolving, but the challenges still persist. I mean, I believe that there's an awareness and there's a dialogue that's increased, but I think also that there still needs to be this element of trust and accountability. So implementing reporting mechanisms and that kind of gap, addressing the root causes effectively, I still think that that's still a challenge for so many. But I'm encouraged that organisations are beginning to understand that tackling racism requires deep cultural change, sustained effort, and meaningful engagement with those that are affected. But that's also, like I've said, engaging trust and accountability, sustainable reporting, and the climate that we're in right now, I think it's so much more important that we're able to actually be doing that. So I do think I do think it's evolving, but I just think there is still so much to do, and that kind of accountability and honesty is something that organisations still need to have to work with, really, from my perspective. Yeah.
Well said, and I agree. It's about cultural shifts, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So could you describe an instance where an organization's response to racism actually felt meaningful? And how did these actions help us move a step closer to achieving that systemic change that we're all striving for?
I mean, one of the things that, that kind of question draws up for me is the organisation I work for, Unison. So Unison, we drew up an anti-racism charter, and it's a powerful example of meaningful action that was first developed in our Eastern region, actually, and it serves as a framework for branches to engage with employers in developing a 12-month monitoring plan. So it kind of reinforces the aspect of monitoring, that your commitment to zero tolerance in the workplace as well. And how that came about was that Black members, I know some of you also say ethnic minorities, but Black members within our organisation is a terminology that we use, were raising concerns around racial discrimination. And one particular organisation decided that they were going to respond with a comprehensive anti-racism strategy. They sought to respond by acknowledging openly the issues that were being raised by Black members. They then formed a dedicated task force that actually had the foresight, terms of reference, that could, with transparent progress tackling, that gave a 12-month monitoring over that period of time, but then extending that to looking on making some further pledges and commitments. And I think these steps really empowered, firstly, employees to want to talk up and feel that the organisation was going to be listening to them. It also signalled a systemic change for the organisation in terms of saying that right from the very top, we were going to take this matter seriously. And I think unless you're getting buy-in from those at a most senior level that can actually make that effective change, then it's really just not going to happen, because you have to instill that trust and you have to instill that belief, but you also have to have immediate action and a long-term strategy in terms of planning that. So it's not just sitting on the shelf, it's not just some research and data, you're actually being proactive and you continue to grow and to change the organisation and reflect that in what you're trying to do with those who report racism, and have those honest but uncomfortable conversations, really. Because I think one of the things is around racism, when you're talking about that, organisations, you know, automatically close their doors, automatically shut down. But I think if you can evolve and you can see that these are serious issues, then you become a better environment that people want to stay and work in, really. So yeah, so I think that was one of our things. Unison's anti-racism charter is a real tangible piece of work that you can actually look at and monitor, transfer skills in terms of that, and really be positive about what's happening in your workplace. So yeah, so I think that that's probably where I would say an organizational change that's happened and has been consistent.
That's really inspiring. I think the thing that stood out for me there is the fact it was long term. It wasn't just a one-off, it was continuous. And I think that creates a safe space for people to think, okay, this doesn't seem performative. This doesn't seem like a one-off instance or something that's very PR. This actually seems like they're trying to create that cultural shift there.
Absolutely. I think I didn't actually mention, I mean, people will say now, but I do think if we can go back to a number of years ago, the murder of George Floyd really shifted the gear in terms of what we all witnessed, many of us live, where you've heard about things that have happened, but once you saw that, I think there was an historic change, not just in terms of the Black movement, but in terms of the racism, anti-racism movement. And organizations had to realize that actually this was real, that having a knee on someone's neck is not just a symbol, it's actually happening. And so therefore we needed to take action. I do think there's been a lull, and I think what's happening across the Atlantic is nothing to not fear us, but actually we have even more of a determination that we need to make things better. So yeah, I do think that was a real cultural shift in terms of that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And that's really inspiring. Again, like considering the current climate, I think we do need to hear things like that and be reminded of, you know, coming together and creating a movement to demand cultural shifts and equality. So thank you, Margaret.
You're welcome.
And could you share any anecdotes or examples of DAVO that you've encountered? And could you also touch on how it manifested and what lessons could be drawn from addressing such actions effectively?
Yeah, I mean, this first time I kind of had heard about this concept of DAVO was when we had a conversation a couple of months ago, and that was kind of like something, okay, I'm learning here as well, you know, 'cause it's always good to learn from others. I'm going to take you back to a bit of an incident that happened with me within an organisation. I think it's important that I reflect on that aspect. I was a national representative at the time, and I was representing some members in a presentation, and I thought the presentation was going really well. And then all of a sudden someone, well, the senior manager responded to a statement and statements that I was making by saying, you know, Margaret, would you stop being so aggressive? Why are you being so aggressive? And it's like, for a moment, it kind of threw me. And then I kind of composed myself and I thought, okay, I think I need to either respond to this, or if I continue, then that kind of statement is going to stay out there and that people are not going to hear the message that I'm actually trying to give, the presentation that I'm giving. They're going to be reflective and thinking, well, she's being aggressive. So I asked the meeting to stop, and I asked for us to convene at another time. And I then went to the senior manager in the organisation, because it was my understanding that the organisation had undertaken unconscious bias training. So therefore, senior managers should be aware of what was taking place and terminology and language. But basically, to cut a long story short, I asked for mediation because I thought it was important, if I was going to interact with senior managers, that they had an understanding that reputation is important. And if I'm in a room with several other senior officers and managers, as well as members, that having that terminology behind me isn't going to be acceptable. So we actually had mediation. I was very open that we were going to learn from this particular episode. My mediator was a white woman, and I say that very distinctly, and the two other people in the room were white women as well. They did ask me if it was going to be okay if I would have any issue in the whole kind of room being of that cultural makeup, and I didn't, because I think it's always a learning opportunity for everyone to understand and hear how certain incidences affect people. But to my shock and horror in that meeting, I was asked about my experience and why I felt it was important to raise it, and the individual who I had raised it with started to cry. And I thought, I'm not going to have this kind of shift in this particular way. So I stopped and asked again if the meeting can be stopped. And so I asked her, why are you crying? Because I really had to have an understanding as to what it was that was making her cry. And she said to me, well, I don't know. I said, well, I think it's important that, you know, we don't turn this meeting into you now feeling the victim and me now being the perpetrator, because I need to understand why you're crying and what that actually means. And her first words were, well, you accused me of being a racist. And I said, I didn't. What I said is that I didn't appreciate the terminology that you used in the meeting to describe me as being aggressive. So, you know, I don't know where you've got that from, but you need to stop crying, because this is about us learning from each other. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to have this turnaround and become about you and not about the issues that we need to resolve in terms of me being able to move forward. To be fair, she did. We had a good meeting. We had that mediation, and in lots of ways we became friends after that, because she had an understanding that terminologies can have an impact. And so for me, the key takeaway was about focusing on the systemic solutions rather than getting caught up in that defensive tactics. That's crucial to driving meaningful change, whilst recognizing that people's behavior can impact on others. And I think during those times as well, when you talk about DAVO, it's about preserving your own well-being in those situations. So engaging means that you also have to understand that your emotional and mental well-being will also get exhausted as well. But I think like I said, from my perspective, it was about cultivating a strong aspect that this is about us all learning, and that where DAVO comes in, deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender, that actually we all have a responsibility with our own actions. And from my perspective, I stayed in that organisation for nearly 25 years, and no one ever then called me aggressive when I was making a presentation, especially if I was articulate and doing it in a way that was actually about a win-win situation, because that's what I'm all about. So I think that would be my experience around DAVO. I could mention others, but I think for me, that was the first of an experience that was not going to happen again. And I think people understood that. And even the mediator said to me, oh, I learned something today. They were mediating me, for God's sake. But anyway, there we go. So that was an experience that I had. And I thought, yeah, we're going to nip that in the bud. So,
Thanks for sharing that, Margaret. And
welcome.
you know, you mentioned you've not heard of DARA before our conversation, and you know, you just mentioned that when this incident happened, someone else also said that they were learning. And I think that's just the key thing about anti-racism and getting that race, you know, equality, justice is about. It's about learning and it's about listening. And I'm happy to hear that it ended positively, by the way, that she actually understood where you were coming from and you were never called aggressive or anything like that again.
No, I think it was important, because I think representation, especially for Black women in organisations, when you're doing that, and I'm not saying for others either, I'm just talking about my own experience. When you're labelled, then that follows you. And then when you come into a room, people see that first and foremost, and they don't actually hear your message, even if it is one that is palpable, tangible. And for me, like I said, I'm all about us all learning. And if I don't stand up and speak out, then why should others listen to me in terms of being able to stand up and speak out as well? So actions at home first, and then be able to do that in the
Very
work
well
that you
said.
do. Yeah.
Very well said.
Mm.
Thanks, Margaret. And just for our audience here, what specific advice would you give to leaders and change makers who are facing challenges or resistance in addressing racism within their own organizations?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I want to say, and I thought about this when I came on here, how would I be able to kind of put this in? I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who actually takes up the mantle in addressing what I see as something that so many people would walk away from. Tackling racism is never, ever easy. I know we have a number of intersectionality approaches in terms of that, but for me, from a personal perspective, as well as a professional one, being in this field a long time, you know, like the old saying with Bob Marley, many are called, but few are chosen. I think the few that are chosen and have chosen to be on this platform are the few that will want to really make a change. So for me, I think leaders and change makers should approach anti-racism work with humility, persistence, and a readiness to listen and learn. I think when you're listening, then you'll learn. Whilst having a genuine commitment to change. And I don't know if anyone listens. I mean, I'm a big philosopher on quotes and stuff. I'm a big Next Generation fan, which is Star Trek. So, you know, they used to have a group called the Borg, and the Borg used to say resistance is futile. And I say to people, resistance is never futile. If you're consistent and you're clear about what it is that you want to achieve, people will come with you. People will see your passion, they will see your drive. But you also have to make sure that you're clear about the transparency that you want, that the organization that you're working with is accountable to what you want to achieve, and that your approach is evolving, and that we're all learning from that. It's not about accusations, it's about learning, and it's about moving us forward. So that's what I would say: persistence, humility, and a readiness to listen and to learn.
Wow, thank you. I love quotes too, by the way, but that was really powerful. All right, perfect. Thank you. Well, I think we can open up to the audience now if there's any questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. You've been so brilliant, Margaret, and Christabel, kind of like very timely as well. There are a few questions kind of coming in. Can I encourage everyone who wants to ask questions to do so? As I mentioned, you know, feel free to ask anything. This part of the session will not be shared. So you can raise your hand, or you can write in the chat area, which I've seen. Maybe I'll have chair's privilege to kind of answer one thing first, if I may, since we're okay on time. Margaret, first of all, thank you. I mean, you know, there's so much rich, so much rich content there. I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you know, you're obviously amazing, and to be able to stop a meeting in flow
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, an amazing kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What I've noticed, you know, in doing the research for the original Home Trees report, which came out in 2020, and also we did a follow-up report in 2023 called Warm Words, is not everyone can do that. Not everyone who is a person of color, black, you know, minoritized ethnic, who is being kind of sometimes slowly being undermined, or sometimes in big ways.
Yeah.
That's a challenge. I just wonder if you just have any reflections on that, and you know, we'll maybe have some people who are kind of earlier career, and you know, it's kind of it's very, yeah, these systems aren't necessarily set up for us. So I just wonder any reflections just on that.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, when I did it at the time, I have to say to you, when the first words came out, I did have a moment of, what do I do here? So it was a chance. it was taking a chance on, will they hear what I'm actually wanting to say if I do this, or will this be a disaster? And I had to believe in my own gut feeling that if I didn't step out now, then I will be forever not stepping out. And I know that that's not easy, especially in terms of where people are in their work careers, or the environment that they're in. But sometimes you can only go with your gut feeling, and you can only go with the room that's at that moment, and people looking and thinking, what is, has she heard what I've heard? Is she going to say anything? Is this a moment where there's going to be a change and a shift? And I had to go with that gut feeling. And I would always go with that, actually, because I think sometimes if you think back around how racism has evolved, how we are on this particular platform, that if someone didn't take a chance, if someone didn't reflect, then we wouldn't be on this platform. And I take it way, way back to our ancestry days for all of us, where my ancestry were probably in the slave trade, but then somebody, a white person's ancestry, were maybe that person who spoke up and said, this is not right, this is not acceptable. So we all have a part to play. And sometimes we just have to go with our gut. And that was a gut instinct that I had, that I needed to squash this, because it was about my reputation, but it was also about how do I then represent the members and the employment for future generations. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer. You also remind me as well that, so many of us have not been, I suppose, within the union movement, which also kind of fosters this kind of sense of voice. And, as a sector in civil society, unions are relatively absent. So, you're the second union person that we've had on a few episodes back. We had Will Sullivan, who you will know, no doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, everyone knows Will. So I think maybe that's also kind of a reminder of the power of kind of collective organising and unionising as well. So I'm going to I'll pass quickly to Roberta, and then I've seen a couple of questions in the chat that we'll move to. Go ahead, Roberta.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sanjeev, and thanks, Margaret. It's your words of wisdom have been very well received. I had a question around, I guess, for organisations. So in the context of reporting racism, so if an individual feels able to make a report of racism, how do you think those reports can be effectively integrated with efforts to combat other forms of discrimination? So I guess this is a question a little bit about intersectionality. So other forms of discrimination, such as misogyny, disableism, heterosexism. How should we treat things separately? Should we see things holistically? And how do you think an organisation can look at those things in the whole, and get to the heart of the issue?
No, I think you need to be looking at them holistically. I think if one doesn't separate from the other. I mean, within my organisation, we have self-organisation, but within the equality unit, we have self-organisation where a number of our members or staff actually belong to all of those categories. They're women, they're Black, they're LGBT+, they've got a disability or hidden disability. So actually reporting mechanisms, there needs to be that whole kind of avenue where people can actually report an issue that actually impacts on every single criteria that might be, because the organisation cannot operate in silo. It's something that's going to actually expand, and it's going to impact on all generations, all cultural groups, all ages, and people from different cultures, and that includes people from our white allies as well. So actually it's about a learning organisational attitude that we need to have. Reporting sexism, misogyny, disability, racism, LGBT+ issues needs to be taken seriously as a collective. No one is any higher or more important than any other. It just needs to be dealt with differently in different aspects as to how we get to a point where we're talking about being an anti-racist, anti-ism, anti-everything think that needs to happen within the organisation. And I recognise, just picking up on what was said before, that within private organisations or civil organisations, that may not be as easy. I've come from the environment of a trade unionism, local government and public sector, but I actually think they cross over because we're all part of the human race. We're all part of the community and we can all learn from each other in terms of making positive changes. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Margaret.